Right. I have a question for you, Dre. And I actually just thought about this. So I don't mean to spring it on you. I honestly don't know the answer to this, and you might not know the answer, and that's fine.
Sure.
But I think ever since Michael Eisner, really, like Disney fans sort of expect their Disney CEOs to be just chocked full of personality, right? Like very much like this Walt Disney-esque figure.
Yeah.
Eisner was like all about that. Bob Iger kind of was too in a weird way. Like he was sort of like just different,
Yeah.
But Chapek isn't. Chapek is kind of like just behind the scenes, kind of a businessy kind of guy.
Yeah.
The prior CEOs after Walt, like what was it? Don Tatum, I think was one of them.
Yeah.
Do you know how they were in turn? Like I don't really ever hear.
There was Card Walker, Miller,
Don Tatum, Ron Miller, right? But were they just Uncle Walt, just bursting with personality kind of CEOs, or was that something that were they more like Chapek? I kind of feel like a lot of these guys, like Card Walker, Don Tatum, they were kind of like on the personality end, more like Bob Chapek. No, I mean I could be wrong. I'm just asking.
Oh, I can just tell you right now, Matthew Murray is itching to get into this conversation, right?
Yeah.
He loves talking about the C-suite executives, right? Okay. Well, I'll say this. You have to understand that the people like Bob Iger and Michael Eisner were cut very differently than the cloth, maybe necessarily, of the people who preceded them, right? Initially after Walt.
Right.
Because those people were great lieutenants. I think they could, take orders from Walt Disney as passed down by them and make it happen. And I think the CEO position as they embodied it reflected that as much. They were a little bit more business oriented. They were a little bit more, maybe less customer facing, right? And they were talking to shareholders and so forth because the company had gone public very recently, I believe in the early 60s, right? Late 50s, somewhere around there. Okay. 54? Something like that. Okay.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Okay.
Period.
Whatever. The fact remains, though, that the CEO position was never really maybe envisioned at that time to be super customer facing. That changed, I think, with the introduction of Michael Eisner, who came from the entertainment industry. So the mindset being, hey, look, listen, if I'm going to be in front of the camera, I'm going to come at it from a little bit more of an entertainment-minded or perspective way of doing it. Maybe embody some of the qualities of Walt, but do it in my own style, my own fashion. I'm an entertainment guy. Bob Iger carried that torch very well, being a weatherman, being previously in front of the camera very, very often, coming from the entertainment industry, right? And so he necessarily carried that kind of tradition on from Michael Eisner to entertainment guys, not lieutenants, entertainment guys.
Right.
Bob Chapek, on the other hand, comes from a different, a different perspective, right? And he has said this publicly, like, hey, I didn't come from the entertainment world. I came from the consumer products world or the theme park world. Very different, right? And I'll say this. He has necessarily had to be a little bit more consumer orientated, but not to the extent, not from the entertainment or the image perspective of Michael Eisner and Bob Iger. So to that extent, I don't think he'll ever embody those qualities. But I think the question is, does he need to? Is that right? Does he need to embody those prior qualities?
Right.
I would say no.
Right.
If in fact he doesn't want to be kind of the face of the company, like his predecessors were. In the time between Walt Disney and Michael Eisner, the higher kind of range executives weren't.
That's what I'm saying. And that's what I'm saying. It's kind of almost like a return to form in a way, like post-Walt, where Don Tatum, Card Walker, these guys weren't the Uncle Walt figure, charismatic kind of guys. They were very much just business guys running the company that bears his name, kind of very similar to Chapek, right? And we can get into the weeds about, well, which CEO made better decisions. I mean, Card Walker was fantastic. I mean, I'm not, diminishing these guys or trying to say like Chapek is better or this guy. No, I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying in terms of like the optics and how they present themselves to the public, I feel like Chapek would fit well with those early post-Walt CEOs, the Don Tatums, the Carl Walkers. He kind of fits in that mold. He's more them than he is like an Eisner or a Bob Iger, you know? And that's just, I kind of put him in that same category as the old school kind of CEOs.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with that.
Roy Disney, to be honest.
It's interesting that it's interesting that you say this because I never really kind of thought about it in this way, but I think you're right. I think it is kind of a return to form. And look, listen, do I need to be the face of every single major announcement for all these, divisions being on TV every single day and doing all that? No. Now I'll be the face of super, big announcements as it relates to the finance side of things, right? As a chief executive, I might need to be. But in terms of, being this kind of showman that Michael Eisner or Bob Iger did, I don't necessarily think that that's what it needs to be. A lot of people have said that, hey, this is the reason why you go with a Michael Eisner or Bob Iger, these kind of, these entertainment executives that came from the industry, right?
Right.
And there might have been a wanting to or desire to do that from those particular executives to be the face of the company, but does it necessarily need a face? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, you can make the argument for and against. And
also, and this is just kind of like a brainstorm session, there's no real right or wrong answer, but like the thing too is like, what would Walt have really like, I'm very curious, and I know this is like a cliche thing, what would Walt have wanted, but I'm always curious of what he would have thought. But after his passing, would Walt have wanted someone to step in and try to mimic his style? Or would he want that person to step in and just sort of run the business and kind of continue to do what he started? And I'm very curious and we'll never know the answer. I'm very curious as to what Walt, because look, Walt was the guy. He would tell his artists like, no, my name is on that building, not yours. Right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
So I wonder, would he have taken offense to something like what Michael Eisner did, where he was like, well, now I'm Uncle Walt? I don't know. And that's a fair question. And I'm not trying to say yes or no, but it is something that I think is interesting to talk about.
It is interesting. I mean, I think the perception for years has been, well, it's a family company, and it should keep that kind of family image. And be spearheaded by some face of it, right? Right. I think that's been the desire. You make an interesting point that maybe Walt Disney himself wouldn't have necessarily wanted that from anybody else but him. But how does that, Walt Disney never envisioned a time after him because he was always going to be around, right? He was, he wasn't looking to pass the reins on, that kind of thing. It was Walt's company, it's Walt's name, and I tell you what, folks, you want to see how far this extended out. Go to Braden's secondary YouTube channel. I believe it's called Addresses Unknown.
Yep. I'll link it down below. Braden's freaking awesome. Braden is like the GOAT, man. I will link that down below. Address Unknown. It's a great channel. He just started documentary style Disney stuff. Phenomenal.
I'm telling you, in Addresses Unknown, you see in the first documentary that they've released, the kind of, the other master builder of Disneyland, I believe is kind of what the name of that first documentary is. But it's all, going into the history of C.V. Wood and his, formation of Disneyland and so forth and construction of it, right? Walt Disney and C.V. Wood gets into a tussle, and Walt Disney says very clearly, "This is my company. This is my park. You gotta fire C.V. Wood here," even though he was under a different entity. Legally, Walt Disney necessarily couldn't do that, but he was still suggesting this was my park, and this guy's out of here. I run the show ultimately, right? And I will say that kind of ownership stake in this,
on you.
Look, this is a very interesting history because Disneyland was kind of a separate entity at certain respects, but still using kind of company money, the studio money, in order to fund projects and so forth and stuff like that. And legally they could have been in a real bind, because remember, the company was public. You were using investor dollars, shareholder dollars, company assets, studio assets in order to fulfill this thing that was Disneyland, but it wasn't owned by the studio. And then, Walt has a financial stake in it with Rhett Law. He owns Imagineering rights, but he's using company money in order to fulfill what they want and so forth. It was a really kind of potentially, as George would say, sticky situation, right? And Roy was looking to protect Walt from legal exposure, essentially legal liability. And it came to a head where Roy was saying, we have to purchase Disneyland and Imagineering in order to get this kind of on the books, and in order to kind of make this all above board, let's say, right? But Walt, I mean, there was a little bit of a negotiation for Disneyland, right? Or at least their stake in it at that time. But Imagineering, that was the thing. It was Wet Enterprises. That was the thing that really created a divide between the brothers. Now, there were shouting matches between the two of them. It was very contentious, and for like 6 months in the late 60s they didn't talk to each other.
Wow.
At all. And Walt said some pretty disparaging things about his brother during this time.
Horrible.
I mean, it was a thing. But that's the thing. Walt, he felt like he was losing something there of his as it became a company asset. Now, he still had, obviously he was still, the head of Disney, right? The head of Disney at that time, and he felt it was kind of his company. But because it was kind of public, and this public entity that he had formed and created, right? But was kind of now, influenced by shareholders and so forth. This public entity,
he lost a little bit.
Was taking his kind of private entity in the form of Disneyland and WED. He definitely felt like he was losing something there. That the dynamic was changing, and he he let it known to Roy that was definitely the case, and that he wasn't necessarily getting paid what he may have felt that these things were worth in order to kind of take these things from him. Yeah. It was a very interesting thing, dude. Not a lot of people talk about it, but it's it just reflects the ownership, I think, that Walt had for some of his creations.
No, 100%. And that's why I think we would all be very surprised if he somehow miraculously came back down. Walt just returned back, somehow got,
Sure.
I think we would all be very surprised at what he approved of and what he disapproved of. Yes. I think a lot of fans have their preconceived notions. Oh, he'd love Michael Eisner. Oh, of course he'd love him. I wouldn't be so sure about that. I mean, and look, I'm not saying one way or the other, but like you said, he had ownership of this thing. And to see someone else step in and try to imitate kind of his shtick, I could definitely see that rubbing him the wrong way. I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. I could see that too. And I can also